Late at night, in a quiet library, Ren sits with red, exhausted eyes, a mountain of books in front of him. He clenches his fist. I have to try harder, but the harder he pushes, the more the words blur, until he finally collapses onto the desk. It was late at night in the city library. Most of the lights were dim, and only a few people remained inside the quiet building. Outside the tall windows, the wind gently moved the branches of the trees. At one of the long wooden tables sat a young man named Ren. A tall stack of books stood in front of him, almost like a wall. Notebooks, papers, and pens were scattered across the table. Ren rubbed his tired eyes. They were red from exhaustion. He had been studying for hours. Ren clenched his fist and whispered to himself, "Come on, I just need to try harder." He opened another book and forced his eyes to focus on the page. But the words refused to stay still. The letters seemed to blur together. The harder he tried to concentrate, the heavier his head felt. Minutes passed. Then suddenly Ren dropped his pen. He leaned forward and rested his head on the table. "I don't understand." His voice was barely louder than a whisper. "I'm trying so hard, so why does everything feel worse?" The library remained silent. For a moment, Ren thought he was completely alone. But in the far corner of the room, an old man sat quietly at a small table. A single lamp illuminated the pages of the book he was reading. The old man had been watching Ren for a while. After a moment, he slowly closed his book. Then he spoke. His voice was calm and gentle. "You're pushing yourself too hard, aren't you?" Ren lifted his head in surprise. He hadn't noticed anyone else in the room. The old man looked to be in his 70s. His hair was gray, and his face carried the quiet expression of someone who had spent many years observing the world. Ren straightened in his chair. "A little pressure is normal," he said defensively. "If I don't push myself, how will I succeed?" The old man smiled softly. "Is that what you believe?" Ren frowned. "Of course it is. That's what everyone says. Work harder. Push yourself further. That's how people succeed." The old man leaned back slightly in his chair. For a moment, he simply watched Ren. Then he said quietly, "Many people believe success comes from motivation." Ren nodded immediately. "Exactly." The old man shook his head gently. "No?" Ren blinked. "No?" The old man looked toward the window, where the branches outside moved slowly in the night wind. Then he said something unexpected. "Motivation often dries the heart." Ren stared at him in confusion. "Dries the heart?" "Yes." The old man turned his eyes back to Ren. "When people constantly force themselves forward, their mind slowly becomes exhausted." Ren crossed his arms. "If motivation isn't the answer, then what is?" The old man studied Ren for a moment. Then he asked a simple question. "Have you ever heard of the spring heart?" Ren shook his head slowly. "No, I haven't." The old man smiled faintly. Outside the window, the wind moved softly through the trees. Then he said, "Some people work very hard, but they never force themselves." Ren frowned. "That sounds impossible." The old man shook his head again. "They are simply living like spring." Ren tilted his head. "Spring?" The old man nodded. "Spring doesn't struggle to make flowers bloom. It simply arrives, and the flowers bloom on their own." Ren fell silent. For the first time that night, he looked down at the books in front of him, then back at the old man. And for the first time, he began to wonder if everything he believed about effort and success might be wrong. Ren stared at the old man for a moment. The words still echoed in his mind. Spring doesn't struggle to make flowers bloom. The idea sounded beautiful, but also confusing. Ren leaned back in his chair. "I don't understand," he admitted. "If people don't push themselves, how do they get anything done?" The old man smiled gently. "That's a very common question." He folded his hands on the table and looked at Ren calmly. "Most people believe success comes from forcing themselves forward." Ren nodded. "That's exactly what I've been trying to do." He gestured toward the pile of books in front of him. "I wake up early. I study late. I push myself every day." Ren hesitated for a moment. "But somehow, the harder I try, the worse it feels." The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, that happens more often than people think." Ren frowned. "Why?" The old man turned slightly toward the window again. Outside, the wind moved gently through the dark branches. "Because effort alone is not enough." Ren looked confused. "Then what else is needed?" The old man answered quietly. "The condition of the heart." Ren blinked. "The heart?" "Yes." the old man continued. Have you ever noticed something? When you are truly interested in something, you can focus for hours without feeling tired. Ren thought about it. Slowly, he nodded. That's true. When I was younger, I could spend an entire afternoon building small machines from toy parts. The old man smiled. And did you force yourself to do that? Ren shook his head. No, I just wanted to do it. Exactly, the old man said. That is what I call the spring heart. Ren leaned forward slightly. The spring heart? Yes. The old man's voice remained calm and steady. The spring heart is a state where the mind moves naturally. There is curiosity. There is energy. And action happens without force. Ren looked down at the books again. That sounds very different from what I'm doing. The old man nodded. Right now, you are trying to force your mind like winter forcing a flower to bloom. Ren chuckled quietly. That sounds impossible. It is impossible, the old man said. In winter, the ground is cold. No matter how much you shout at the seeds, they will not grow. Ren looked thoughtful. So what changes when spring comes? The old man pointed gently toward the window. In spring, the conditions change. The ground becomes warmer, the sunlight returns, and suddenly, the same seeds begin to grow naturally. Ren slowly began to understand. So instead of forcing the flower, I should change the conditions? The old man smiled. Exactly. Ren sat quietly for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been bothering him. How do I create those conditions? The old man's expression softened. That, he said slowly, is something we must explore step by step. Ren looked curious. Step by step? Yes. The old man picked up his book again. The spring heart cannot be forced either. It must be discovered. Ren watched him carefully. But I will tell you something important, the old man continued. The first step is very simple. Ren leaned forward. What is it? The old man looked directly into Ren's eyes and said quietly, You must stop fighting your own heart. Ren sat there in silence. For the first time that night, he began to wonder if the problem had never been his lack of effort, but the way he had been using it. Outside the window, the wind had grown softer, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the glass, spring was waiting to arrive. Ren remained silent for a while after the old man spoke. You must stop fighting your own heart. The sentence sounded simple, yet it carried a strange weight. Ren slowly sat up straight. But if I stop pushing myself, he said, won't I become lazy? The old man shook his head gently. That is a misunderstanding many people have. Ren frowned. A misunderstanding? Yes. The old man rested his hands calmly on the table. People believe that discipline comes from force, but true discipline comes from alignment. Ren tilted his head. Alignment? The old man nodded. The heart and the mind must move in the same direction. When they move together, effort becomes light. But when they move against each other, he gestured toward Ren's stack of books. Even the smallest task becomes heavy. Ren looked down at the books again. That feeling was painfully familiar. The old man continued speaking. Most people think the mind controls the heart, but in reality, the heart always moves first. Ren looked up. What do you mean? The old man asked a question. Have you ever tried to study something you truly disliked? Ren laughed quietly. Many times. And how did it feel? The old man asked. Ren sighed. Like dragging a huge stone. The old man nodded. Exactly. But when you study something that interests you, Ren finished the sentence. It doesn't feel like work. Correct. The old man smiled slightly. That is because your heart has already moved. Ren leaned forward. So the heart moves first, and the mind follows? Yes, the old man said. The heart creates energy. The mind organizes that energy. Ren thought carefully about those words. So, when my heart is cold, the old man nodded before Ren even finished. No amount of force will make the mind work well. Ren slowly remembered something from his childhood. When I was younger, he said, I loved taking apart small machines. I could spend hours doing it. The old man smiled. And did anyone tell you to do that? Ren shook his head. No, I did it because I wanted to. The old man nodded again. That is the natural movement of the heart. He paused before continuing. But as people grow older, they begin listening less to their heart. Ren looked curious. What do they listen to instead? The old man answered calmly. Pressure, expectations, fear of failure, fear of falling behind. Ren looked down. Each of those words felt uncomfortably familiar. The old man leaned back slightly. And when those voices grow louder, the heart slowly becomes quiet. Ren spoke softly. So the heart becomes cold. Yes, the old man said. And when the heart is cold, people try to solve the problem with motivation. Ren nodded slowly. That's exactly what I've been doing. The old man smiled gently. But motivation is like a fire. It burns brightly for a short time. Then it fades. Ren looked thoughtful. That's true, the old man continued, but the spring heart is different. It is not fire. It is warmth. Ren looked confused again. Warmth? Yes, warmth stays. It grows slowly. And when it appears, the mind begins to move naturally. Ren sat quietly for a moment. Then he asked, So what should I do first? The old man paused. Then he gave the first clear instruction. The first lesson is simple. Ren waited. The old man said, Pay attention to what warms your heart. Ren repeated the sentence softly. What warms my heart? The old man nodded. Curiosity, interest, even small excitement. These are the first signs of spring. Ren looked down at his notebook and slowly wrote the words. The old man stood up and picked up his book again. Before leaving, he said one last thing. Tonight, don't force yourself to study everything. Ren looked surprised. Then what should I do? The old man smiled. Find one thing that sparks even a little curiosity, and follow it. Then he turned and walked slowly toward the door. Ren remained seated at the table. The library was quiet again. For the first time that night, he did not feel the weight of the books in front of him. Instead, he opened one of them, not because he had to, but because, for some reason, he was curious about a single page. The next evening, Ren returned to the library. The sky outside had already turned dark, and the quiet building felt almost the same as the night before. But Ren felt slightly different. Last night, he had followed the old man's advice. Instead of forcing himself to study everything, he had chosen only one topic that caught his curiosity. Just one. At first, he thought he would stop after a few minutes. But strangely, time had passed much faster than he expected. Ren sat down at the same table and opened his notebook. On the page, the sentence from yesterday was still there. Pay attention to what warms your heart. He looked at it for a moment. Then he added another small note beneath it. Curiosity creates energy. Just then, a familiar voice appeared behind him. So, how did your experiment go? Ren looked up and smiled. The old man had returned. He was holding the same worn book as before. Ren gestured toward the chair across from him. I tried what you said. The old man sat down slowly. And? Ren thought for a moment. It was strange, he admitted. I only planned to read a few minutes, but I ended up studying for almost 2 hours. The old man smiled knowingly. That is the beginning of the spring heart. Ren leaned forward, but there's still something I don't understand. The old man raised an eyebrow slightly. What is it? Ren tapped his notebook. Even when I'm curious, my mind still feels tired sometimes. The old man nodded. Yes, that is normal. Ren frowned slightly. Then what's missing? The old man glanced around the quiet library before answering. The second lesson. Ren straightened in his chair. And what is that? The old man spoke calmly. Your mind needs space. Ren blinked. Space? Yes. The old man continued. Look at your schedule. Ren hesitated. It's very full. The old man chuckled softly. I suspected that. Ren scratched the back of his head. I plan almost every hour of the day. The old man nodded slowly. That is the problem. Ren looked surprised. The problem? Yes. The old man pointed gently at Ren's notebook. When the mind is constantly filled with tasks, it has no room to breathe. Ren looked thoughtful. So you're saying I'm thinking too much? Not exactly, the old man replied. You are thinking without pause. Ren leaned back in his chair. What difference does that make? The old man gestured toward the window. Outside, the branches of the trees swayed gently in the night wind. Have you ever noticed something? When you struggle with a difficult problem, the answer often appears when you step away. Ren nodded slowly. That happens to me sometimes. Exactly, the old man said. That is the mind creating space. Ren tilted his head. But I thought productivity meant staying focused all the time. The old man shook his head. Constant pressure clouds the mind. Important ideas rarely appear in a crowded mind. Ren thought about the times when he had solved problems while walking or taking a shower. It suddenly made sense. The old man continued speaking. Space allows your thoughts to connect. It allows curiosity to grow. And most importantly, it allows your heart to speak. Ren looked down at the notebook again. So if my mind is always full, I won't hear my heart. The old man nodded. Exactly. For a moment, the two of them sat quietly. The library felt calm and peaceful. Ren finally asked, "So what should I do?" The old man smiled. "The second lesson is simple." Ren waited. The old man said, "Leave small spaces in your day." Ren frowned slightly. Spaces? Yes. Moments without pressure. Moments where your mind can wander. Ren slowly wrote the words into his notebook. Leave space for the mind. The old man stood up again and picked up his book. Before walking away, he turned back toward Ren. One more thing. Ren looked up. When the mind has space, the heart begins to warm. Then he left the library once again. Ren sat alone at the table. The stack of books in front of him no longer felt like a mountain. Outside the window, the wind moved gently through the trees. And somewhere inside Ren's quiet mind, a little more space had begun to appear. The following evening, Ren arrived at the library earlier than usual. The building was still quiet, and only a few lamps were lit across the large reading room. Ren sat down at his usual table and opened his notebook. Several sentences now filled the page. Pay attention to what warms your heart. Leave space for the mind. Ren read them slowly. Something about these ideas felt different from everything he had learned before. For years, he believed success required constant effort and pressure, but the old man seemed to be describing a completely different way of living. Just then, the familiar sound of footsteps approached. Ren looked up. The old man had arrived again. He placed his worn book on the table and sat down across from Ren. You look thoughtful tonight. Ren nodded. I've been thinking about the first two lessons. And what have you discovered? The old man asked. Ren hesitated for a moment before answering. I realized something strange. The old man waited patiently. Ren continued. Even when I follow my curiosity, even when I give my mind space, sometimes I still feel stuck. The old man nodded slowly. Yes, that is because there is another obstacle. Ren leaned forward slightly. What obstacle? The old man looked directly at him. An invisible one. Ren frowned. What do you mean? The old man spoke calmly. Many people believe their biggest problem is laziness, but most of the time, that is not true. Ren blinked. Then what is the real problem? The old man answered quietly. Anxiety. Ren froze slightly. The word hit him harder than he expected. The old man continued. People worry about failure. They worry about what others will think. They worry about being left behind. Ren slowly nodded. Every sentence sounded painfully familiar. The old man leaned back in his chair. When anxiety appears, the mind becomes tight. And when the mind is tight, curiosity disappears. Ren looked down at his hands. That explains a lot. The old man continued speaking gently. Tell me honestly, when you study late at night like this, what are you really thinking about? Ren hesitated. Then he answered quietly. I'm afraid. The old man nodded. Afraid of what? Ren took a deep breath. Afraid that my effort won't be enough. Afraid that others will move ahead of me. Afraid that I'll fail. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The library remained silent. Then the old man said softly, You see, it isn't lack of effort that stops you. It's the fear behind the effort. Ren slowly understood. All this time, he believed he simply needed more motivation. But maybe the real problem had been something else entirely. The old man continued. Fear freezes the heart. And when the heart is frozen, no amount of pushing will make it move. Ren whispered, So, that's why everything feels heavy. Yes, the old man said. For many people, the mind is not tired from work. It is tired from worry. Ren leaned back in his chair. The idea felt both uncomfortable and strangely relieving. So what should I do when anxiety appears? He asked. The old man smiled gently. You don't fight it. Ren looked confused. I don't? The old man shook his head. Fighting fear often makes it stronger. Ren tilted his head. Then what should I do? The old man gave a simple answer. Understand it. Ren frowned. Understand it? Yes. When fear appears, ask yourself one question. Ren waited. The old man said slowly, What exactly am I afraid of? Ren repeated the question quietly. What exactly am I afraid of? The old man nodded. When fear becomes clear, it begins to lose its power. Ren immediately wrote the question in his notebook. What exactly am I afraid of? The old man stood up again and picked up his book. Before leaving, he looked back at Ren. Tonight, don't try to defeat your fear. Ren looked surprised. Then what should I do? The old man smiled softly. Just listen to it. Then he walked slowly toward the door and disappeared into the quiet hallway. Ren remained seated at the table. For the first time, he didn't immediately open his books. Instead, he looked down at the question he had written. Outside the window, the wind had become calm, and somewhere deep inside Ren's mind, something that had been hidden for a long time was beginning to surface. That night, Ren did not study much. Instead, he spent most of his time staring at the question written in his notebook. What exactly am I afraid of? At first, the answer seemed obvious. Failure. But the more he thought about it, the more complicated it became. Was he really afraid of failing? Or was he afraid of something else? Ren slowly realized something uncomfortable. He was not only afraid of failing, he was afraid of falling behind. Behind his classmates, behind the people he saw online, behind the expectations he believed others had for him. Ren leaned back in his chair and sighed quietly. For the first time, he could clearly see how much pressure he had been carrying. The next evening, he returned to the library once again. The quiet reading room had begun to feel strangely familiar. Ren sat at the same table and opened his notebook. He reread the lessons he had written. Pay attention to what warms your heart. Leave space for the mind. What exactly am I afraid of? As he was reading, a calm voice spoke from behind him. So, what did you discover? Ren turned around. The old man had arrived again. He sat down across from Ren and placed his book on the table. Ren hesitated before answering. I think I understand my fear now. The old man nodded. And what is it? Ren took a slow breath. I'm afraid of being left behind. The old man looked at him for a moment. Then he asked a simple question. Behind whom? Ren blinked. Everyone else. The old man gave a small smile. That brings us to the fourth lesson. Ren leaned forward slightly. What is it? The old man folded his hands together. Tell me honestly, how often do you compare yourself to others? Ren let out a quiet laugh. Almost every day. The old man nodded slowly. That is very common. Ren looked down. But it makes everything feel worse. Yes, the old man said gently, because comparison changes how you see the world. Ren looked up. What do you mean? The old man pointed lightly toward the books on the table. When you compare yourself to others, you stop looking at your own path. Instead, you only see the distance between you and someone else. Ren thought about that for a moment. It was true. Whenever he compared himself to others, he never noticed how far he had already come. He only saw how far he still had to go. The old man continued. Comparison creates two illusions. Ren listened carefully. The first illusion is that everyone else is ahead. The second illusion is that there is only one correct path. Ren frowned. Isn't there? The old man shook his head slowly. Not in life. He gestured toward the window again. Outside, the trees stood quietly in the night. Look at nature. Every tree grows at a different speed. Some bloom early, some bloom later. But none of them are wrong. Ren watched the branches moving gently in the wind. For the first time, the metaphor felt clear. The old man continued softly. When you constantly compare yourself, you begin to rush. And when you rush, you lose connection with what truly interests you. Ren nodded slowly. That's exactly what happened to me. The old man smiled. That is why the spring heart cannot grow in competition. Ren looked curious. Why not? Because the spring heart grows through curiosity, not through rivalry. Ren leaned back in his chair. So if I stop comparing myself, I can focus on what actually interests me. The old man nodded. Exactly. Ren wrote another sentence in his notebook. Stop measuring your path with someone else's ruler. The old man stood up again, preparing to leave. Before walking away, he gave Ren the fourth lesson. The fourth lesson is simple. Ren waited. The old man said, walk your own road. Then he added one final sentence. Because when you follow your own path, you stop chasing others and finally begin moving forward. The old man turned and slowly walked toward the exit. Ren remained alone at the table again. For a long moment, he looked out the window. The trees outside were silent and still, each one growing in its own time. And for the first time in a long while, Ren felt that maybe, just maybe, he didn't need to run anymore. For a long moment after the old man left, Ren remained seated at the table. The library was almost empty now. Only the soft hum of the lights filled the quiet room. Ren slowly read through the notes in his notebook again. Pay attention to what warms your heart. Leave space for the mind. Understand your fear. Walk your own road. Each sentence felt simple, yet together they had begun to change the way he looked at everything. Ren closed the notebook and looked out the window. For the first time in months, he didn't feel the usual pressure pushing against his chest. But there was still one question left in his mind. What should he actually do now? The next evening, Ren returned to the library earlier than usual. The sky outside was painted with the soft colors of sunset. He sat at the same table and waited. Minutes passed. Then the familiar footsteps finally appeared again. The old man entered the room quietly, carrying the same worn book. When he saw Ren, he smiled. "You're here early today." Ren nodded. "I've been thinking about everything you told me." The old man sat down across from him. "And what conclusion have you reached?" Ren hesitated before answering. "I understand the lessons, but I still don't know how to begin." The old man watched him calmly. "What do you mean?" Ren spoke honestly. "If I stop pushing myself, if I stop comparing myself, then how do I actually move forward?" The old man leaned back slightly in his chair. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he asked a simple question. "Ren, have you ever watched travelers on a long journey?" Ren blinked. "Travelers?" "Yes. Some people travel as if they are racing. They hurry from one place to another. They are always focused on the destination." Ren nodded slowly. "I've seen people like that." The old man continued. "But other travelers move differently." Ren listened carefully. They walk at a steady pace. They notice the landscape. They talk with people they meet. They enjoy the road itself. Ren tilted his head. "So they are not in a hurry." The old man smiled gently. "Exactly." He leaned forward slightly. "Life works the same way." Ren frowned. "But if I move too slowly, won't I fall behind?" The old man shook his head. "Behind whom?" Ren paused. He had heard that question before. The old man continued softly. "When you treat life like a competition, every step feels heavy. But when you treat life like a journey, every step becomes part of the experience." Ren looked down at the table. The words felt strangely peaceful. The old man stood up slowly. "This is the final lesson." Ren looked up quickly. "The final lesson?" The old man nodded. "Yes." He looked at Ren with calm eyes. "Don't run like someone in a race." Ren listened carefully. The old man continued. "Walk like someone on a journey." The sentence hung quietly in the air. Ren felt something inside him loosen. For years, he had been running toward success, running away from failure, running because everyone else seemed to be running too. But maybe he didn't need to run at all. Ren asked one last question. "So where should I start?" The old man smiled warmly. "With a small step." Ren waited. The old man gave his final advice. "Tomorrow, come back to what interests you. Not for hours. Just 10 minutes. Ren looked surprised. "Only 10? The old man nodded. "Yes." "Do it again the next day. And the next. Small steps are how journeys begin." Ren slowly wrote the words into his notebook. "Start with 10 minutes." The old man picked up his book. Then he walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned around one last time. "Someday," he said gently, "you will realize something important." Ren looked up. "What is it?" The old man smiled. "You were never lacking motivation." He paused. "You were only forgetting how to walk." Then he left the library quietly. Ren remained seated at the table. But this time, he didn't feel lost anymore. Because for the first time, he finally knew where to begin. The next morning, Ren woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight slipped quietly through the curtains, filling the small room with a gentle warmth. For a moment, he simply lay there, staring at the ceiling. Normally, mornings felt heavy to him. His mind would immediately begin racing through everything he had to do. But today felt different. Ren slowly sat up and looked at the notebook on his desk. He walked over and opened it. The final sentence he had written the night before stared back at him. "Start with 10 minutes." Ren smiled faintly. "Just 10 minutes," he murmured to himself. Later that day, he returned to the library again. The same quiet room, the same wooden table near the window. But this time he didn't bring a mountain of books. Only one. Ren sat down and opened it. For a moment, he hesitated. Part of him expected the familiar pressure to return. The voice that always whispered, "You must do more, you must go faster, you must catch up." But instead, he remembered the old man's words. Walk like someone on a journey. Ren took a slow breath. Then he began to read. Just one page. The 10 minutes passed quickly. When he looked up at the clock, he was surprised. The pressure he used to feel wasn't there. His mind felt lighter. Ren looked back down at the book. There was another section that caught his curiosity. He read one more page, then another. Time moved quietly. The library remained peaceful around him, and something inside Ren began to move again. Not from pressure, not from fear, but from a small, natural curiosity. Hours later, Ren finally closed the book. He leaned back in his chair and looked out the window. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. On one of the branches, a small flower had just begun to bloom. Ren watched it quietly. He thought about everything the old man had told him. About the heart, about space, about fear, about walking his own path. For the first time in months, his mind felt calm. He didn't know exactly how long his journey would be. He didn't know how fast he would reach his goals. But strangely, that no longer felt important, because something else had returned, something he had almost forgotten, a quiet warmth inside his chest. Like the beginning of spring, Ren picked up his notebook and wrote one final sentence. I don't need to force myself anymore. Then he closed the notebook and smiled softly. Outside the window, the small flower continued to bloom, just as it always had, without rushing, without fear, simply because spring had arrived.